The alien invasion begins. The sky above Virion 3 turned dark without warning. It was early morning, and the human colony was just starting to wake up. Birds flew out of the forests, frightened by a deep, rumbling sound coming from the clouds. People looked up and froze. Huge alien warships were slowly moving across the sky, blocking out the sun like a massive shadow. The ground shook lightly as the engines passed overhead. No one had seen ships this big before. They were not just here to visit. They were here to take control. Inside the colony's central hub, alarms began to scream. Red lights flashed across. Control panels and panic filled the air. LT Caravas, a young maintenance engineer, stood frozen near the power station. Her hands were covered in oil, and she was holding a broken wrench. Her team had been fixing a cooling unit when the invasion began. She looked around and saw fear in the eyes of the workers. No one had weapons. This was not a military base. It was a science and farming colony. The Zarnak had arrived. The Zarnak were a brutal alien race known across many systems. They were tall, armored, and cold. They never sent warnings. They never accepted peace. When they landed on a planet, they destroyed all resistance, enslaved the people, and stripped the land for resources. Virion 3 was just another easy target for them, or so they thought. As the warships hovered above, Zarnak ground units began to drop from the sky. Giant metal pods smashed into the ground, spraying dirt and smoke. The doors opened, and tall figures stepped out. They held plasma rifles and wore black armor with glowing blue lights. Their movements were fast and silent. They began marching toward the colony without fear. The first building they entered was the communication center. Within minutes, the signal tower exploded. Earth would not hear their call for help. Kara ran through the maintenance tunnels beneath the power station. She was alone now. Her team had scattered when the explosion started. She held the broken wrench tightly. It was heavy, made of steel, and sharp at the end. She had no training, no combat gear, no plan, but she had something the Zarnak didn't have. She had desperation and imagination. Above her, she heard footsteps, heavy boots. Zarnak soldiers had entered the power station. Kara's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't breathe. She crouched in the shadows, watching as one of the aliens walked by. It was almost 2 meters tall, with gray skin and glowing eyes. It looked around the room slowly, scanning for movement. Kara knew she couldn't outrun it. She had to fight. When the soldier passed near the open floor vent, Kara acted. She jumped out and slammed the wrench into its knee joint. The metal cracked. The alien screamed in a high, sharp voice and turned, swinging its weapon toward her. Kara ducked and hit again. This time on the side of its neck, sparks flew. The alien fell, twitching and broken. Kara stood there, shaking, staring at what she had just done. She had just killed a Zarnak soldier. With a wrench, she took the alien's weapon and looked at it. Too heavy, too unfamiliar. She dropped it and kept the wrench. At least she knew how to use that. She whispered to herself, "If it can break, it can kill." Those words gave her courage. Outside, the colony was in chaos. Fires burned in several areas. People were running in every direction, some hiding, some helping others. The Zarnak moved like machines, clearing streets and destroying buildings. But they had one weakness. They didn't understand how humans think. The Zarnak used perfect military strategy. Humans used chaos and emotion. Kara moved from building to building, helping who she could. In a storage room, she found a group of survivors, farmers, workers, and children. They had no weapons. Kara looked around and saw metal pipes, tools, chemicals, and batteries. She started putting things together in her mind. Traps, bombs, distractions, anything. She said to the group, "We don't need guns. We need ideas. We fight with what we have." The others looked unsure, but her eyes were strong. One by one, they began to help. An old woman handed Kara a jar of flammable oil. A boy brought a box of nails. Someone else rolled in a cart full of sharp farming tools. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Meanwhile, the Zarnak commander watched the battle from above. He was confused. This was supposed to be a simple invasion. The humans had no military power. But reports were coming. In that some soldiers were being killed by tools, a wrench, a hammer. One even said they were attacked by a drone made from kitchen parts. He frowned. This was not normal. As night fell, the first day of the invasion ended. The colony was damaged, but not broken. Kara stood on top of a building, looking at the smoke rising in the distance. She held the wrench in one hand, her face dirty but determined. She whispered again, "Anything can be a weapon." And for the first time, the Zarnak began to feel fear. Improvised warfare. The night had passed slowly, but not quietly. Explosions, screams, and the deep hum of alien machines echoed through the ruins of the human colony. Fires still burned in the far east quarter, where the Zarnak had flattened half the housing blocks. But something was different now. The aliens had expected surrender. They had expected fear. What they got instead was resistance in the most unexpected form. Kara did not sleep that night. She worked in silence with a small group of survivors, hidden beneath an old farming warehouse. The room smelled of chemicals and dust. The walls were cracked but strong enough to keep them hidden from alien drones. Around her, others followed her lead. Some were mixing cleaning liquids together under her instructions. Others were cutting up metal scraps or attaching batteries to wires. Kara's mind worked faster than her hands. Every broken part, every useless item in the room became something more. A weapon, a trap, a tool for survival. Earlier that day, she had taken down a Zarnak soldier with a wrench. That moment changed everything for her. She had realized the truth. They did not need traditional weapons. They needed creativity. The aliens had powerful guns, yes, but they followed patterns. They followed rules. Humans did not. Humans created. Humans adapted. Outside, just before sunrise, a squad of Zarnak soldiers marched down one of the broken streets. Their feet made deep, even thuds on the ground. Their scanners picked up heat signatures from a building nearby, a small maintenance shed. One of them stepped forward and kicked down the metal door. Nothing inside, just shelves of tools and boxes of parts. But before the soldier could turn back, a sudden burst of steam hit its face. The sprinkler system above had been rewired. The pipes now held boiling acid made from cleaning products. The soldier screamed and fell back, its armor hissing and melting. The rest raised their weapons, confused, but it was already too late. The entire shed exploded from within. A drone, made from a toaster, battery, and motion sensor, had been left behind as a trap. It was no bigger than a football, but it had just taken out half the squad. Back in the warehouse, Kara listened to the small radio they had recovered from a crashed patrol vehicle. The signal was weak, but it picked up Zarnak transmissions. She smiled as she heard the panic in their voices. They were reporting attacks from all directions. They said the colony was full of hidden weapons, that nothing was safe. One even claimed he had been stabbed by a broom with sharpened nails. Kara did not laugh. She was too focused. She stood up and pointed at the map drawn on the floor. She assigned each group their next task. The northern street would be lined with oil slicks and marbles. The old greenhouse would become a trap filled with mirrors and glass shards. Every alley would become a maze of confusion and pain. For the enemy, among her small group was an old man named Liam. He had worked as a janitor for 30 years and knew every building in the colony. He was quiet and slow-moving, but his knowledge was priceless. He showed Kara which tunnels were still safe and which vents could be used to escape. But more than that, he brought a strange energy to the group. When Kara asked him what he had, he simply rolled out a cart filled with floor polish, drain cleaner, and wires. He said, with a small smile, that they had everything they needed. And he was right. That afternoon, they launched their first planned counterattack. In the central plaza, a group of aliens walked through what seemed to be a calm and empty space. Suddenly, high-pitched noise exploded from the rooftops. Kara had set up old speakers powered by solar batteries, blasting sound frequencies. That disoriented the aliens. At the same time, smoke bombs made from fertilizer and kitchen vinegar filled the air. From the windows above, humans dropped buckets filled with sticky glue and sharp nails. The aliens stumbled and slipped. Some fired wildly into the smoke, hitting nothing but walls. By the time they cleared the area, 3 of them were down, and the rest were retreating. Inside their command ship, the Zarnak general studied the reports. Something was wrong. These humans were not soldiers, but they were unpredictable. One report mentioned a small girl using a slingshot to break a soldier's mask. Another claimed that a farmer had turned a wheelbarrow into a catapult. The general did not understand how this was possible. They had scanned the colony. There were no weapons, no trained fighters. Yet they were losing men. And worse, they were losing control. Kara and her team regrouped in the evening. Some were bruised, some were scared, but no one had died that day. That was a victory. Kara stood before them and spoke. She told them what the aliens feared most was not weapons. It was the human mind. The human ability to turn anything into something dangerous. A spoon, a chair, a radio, a mirror. If it could be moved or broken, it could be used. She said they would continue to fight, not with power, but with creativity. As the night came again, the colony remained under alien control, but the fear had changed sides. The humans were supposed to be defeated by now. Instead, they had just begun. Kara looked at the stars above and whispered a promise to herself. They would not be erased. They would not be forgotten. And if the Zarnak wanted war, then they would. Learn what true human resistance looked like. The turning point. Third day began with silence, but not the kind that brings peace. It was the silence before a storm, the kind that makes even brave people feel something cold in their chest. Kara woke up in the narrow back room of an old bakery, her head resting against a box of wires and broken circuit boards. Her sleep had been short and filled with loud dreams. She stretched slowly, her muscles aching from the day before, and then stood up to look through the cracks in the wall. Outside, the streets looked empty. The fire had stopped, but smoke still floated in the air like ghosts from yesterday's battle. The resistance was still alive. That was the miracle. Her team had survived 2 full days against a stronger and better armed enemy, using only scraps and instincts. But Kara knew it could not last forever. The Zarnak would adapt soon. She had seen it happen before on other worlds. Once they understood a problem, they would crush it without mercy. They were machines in armor, without fear or doubt, and sooner or later they would stop underestimating the humans. She needed to change the game again. Something bigger. Something smarter. She left the bakery and headed to the North Quarter, where the others were waiting. Mr. Leem was already awake, checking a row of chemical traps they had placed in an abandoned alley. He nodded as she approached, then pointed to a bent antenna hanging from the rooftop. Kara climbed up carefully and adjusted the signal scanner. The device began to beep slowly, then faster. They had caught something. A transmission not from Earth, but from another colony. A voice came through the static, weak, broken, but real. Other survivors were out there. Other colonies were resisting. 2. Kara's eyes lit up with something more powerful than fire. Hope. She called the others and told them the news. It was not just them. The Zarnak were facing small uprisings across the system. Her message had spread. People were fighting back, not with guns but with courage and creativity. Humans were learning from each other. They were building new traps, new tricks, and strange little machines that defied logic. The Zarnak didn't know how to deal with it. The turning point came later that afternoon when a Zarnak dropship landed near the colony center. This one was different. It was heavier, marked with strange symbols. From it stepped a tall alien, not in armor, but in a long dark robe. Its eyes glowed purple instead of blue. It did not carry a weapon. Instead, it carried something worse. It was a mind reader. A rare Zarnak officer trained to scan the thoughts and intentions of enemies. The commander had sent it to understand the humans and break their will from within it. Moved through the ruined streets slowly, scanning the air, listening to thoughts. When it reached the bakery where Kara had stayed the night before, it stopped. It placed its long hand against the wall and closed its eyes. It felt flashes, anger, desperation, laughter, plans made out of madness, traps built from toys. It felt the echo of Mr. Leem's pride as he finished his chemical bombs. It felt Kara's determination when she turned a mirror into a defense system. It pulled back, confused. This was not how battles were supposed to go. This was not how humans were supposed to think. Their thoughts had no structure, no order. The mind reader felt noise. Not chaos from fear, but chaos from invention. It had studied many species before, but never one like this. Humans were not working from a single plan. They were working from thousands of small ones, each made in the moment, each created from random objects. The mind reader returned to the command ship and reported its findings. One sentence echoed through the Zarnak bridge like a warning bell. Human minds are not predictable. They are dangerous. At the same time, Kara and her team were preparing for their biggest ambush yet. They had located an underground fuel line that ran beneath one of the streets still controlled by the enemy. With Leem's help, they wired it with pressure triggers built from cooking timers and metal panels. Kara knew they could not destroy all the aliens, but if they broke their supply route, they would force the Zarnak to split their units. That would buy time for more survivors to join the resistance. They waited until nightfall. When the Zarnak convoy passed over the street, the traps went off with perfect timing. A series of explosions tore through the road. Fire rose into the air like angry waves. 2 armored vehicles flipped onto their sides. The soldiers inside screamed in panic. From the rooftops, Kara's team threw paint-filled balloons and sound bombs, confusing their scanners and blocking their vision. The attack lasted less than 5 minutes, but it was a clear message. This was no longer a one-sided invasion. This was a war. And the humans were winning small victories in big ways. Back inside the command ship, the Zarnak general stood in silence. As he watched the recordings, he saw his soldiers defeated not by weapons, but by objects found in kitchens and garages. He saw fear in their movements. They had stopped marching. They were checking every shadow, slowing down. That fear was growing. The general slammed his hand on the console and ordered new reinforcements. He would burn the colony to the ground if needed. But even as he gave the order, doubt crept into his thoughts. Because if humans could turn a toaster into a bomb, if they could use toys to confuse scanners, if they could build an army without guns or armor, what else were they capable of? And somewhere near the smoking street, standing quietly on a rooftop with her wrench in one hand and a stolen Zarnak scanner in the other, Kara looked at the stars above and whispered again to herself, not with fear this time, but with belief. Anything can be a weapon if you know how to use it. Mind games begin. The fire had burned out, but its memory lingered in the black marks on the walls and the sharp smell of melted steel that hung in the air. The Zarnak soldiers moved more slowly now, stepping over debris with caution and keeping their weapons aimed in all directions. They had started wearing extra armor and scanning every object around them, not because of orders, but because of fear. The machines they once saw as toys had become traps. The humans they once saw as prey had become predators, and somewhere deep inside their perfect ranks, a new kind of doubt had started to grow. Kara knew this was the moment to push harder, but not with weapons. She had already seen the Zarnak mind reader, and she understood that the aliens had begun studying human thoughts. That was a mistake. Human minds were not made to be read like books. They were built on chaos and change. 1 second full of fear, and the next full of fire. Kara decided to turn that chaos into a weapon. She gathered her team in the basement of a half-destroyed school. The walls were filled with old drawings, and the shelves still held broken toys. Around them lay parts of small machines, speakers, mirrors, wires, batteries. Everything that had once been thrown aside was now being used again, not for survival this time, but for confusion. They began broadcasting strange messages across all open frequencies. Some were real, some were lies. Some were just strange noises and voices pretending to be aliens arguing or humans laughing. At the same time, they set up fake camps complete with heat sources and movement sensors, built from blinking lights and sound recorders. When Zarnak drones scanned the area, they saw bodies that were not there, voices that came from nowhere, and movements that had no source. They launched attacks on empty streets and wasted fuel chasing ghosts. Kara watched the confusion grow, and she smiled. She was not just fighting now. She was playing. Mr. Leem had become even more important during this phase. His deep knowledge of the colony's layout allowed the team to build hidden doors and silent tunnels. They would appear in one place, attack quickly, and vanish without leaving a trace. Sometimes they left behind strange symbols painted on walls or toys arranged in patterns. The aliens did not understand them, but that only made the fear worse. Every object had become a message. Every silence had become a warning. The humans were not just fighting with tools anymore. They were fighting with stories, with shadows, with fear itself. But Kara knew the Zarnak would not stay blind forever. The mind reader returned, and this time it came closer. It began entering the tunnels, moving slowly alone, reaching out with its mind to find the center of the chaos. It scanned every thought, every whisper, every flash of memory it could find. It saw Kara's face again and again in the minds of the survivors. It followed her presence like a trail of fire, leading deeper into the ruins. She had become the symbol of the resistance, and the mind reader wanted her broken. It wanted to end the chaos by cutting off the head. That evening, as the sky turned red with sunset, Kara and her team set a new plan in motion. They wired the central plaza with sensors that triggered not explosions this time, but illusions. Holograms made from mirrored glass and flickering lights filled the air. The aliens who entered the plaza saw human fighters on every side. They fired at shadows and ran from echoes. Meanwhile, the real humans struck from the side, using simple weapons thrown from rooftops and slingshots hidden in windows. It was not just a battle. It was a trick, a show. A game with deadly rules, but the victory came with a price. Mr. Leem had chosen to stay behind during the distraction. He had volunteered to trigger the last set of traps manually, knowing it would be too dangerous to escape. Kara tried to stop him, but he only smiled and said that he had cleaned every floor of this colony for 30 years, and if he had to die, he would do it cleaning up the enemy. When the traps exploded and the building collapsed over the Zarnak commander, Leem was still inside. His sacrifice broke something in Kara, but it also lit a fire deeper than before that night. She sat alone in a storage room holding a broken piece of Leem's cart. Around her, the others were silent, each lost in their thoughts, but none of them wanted to stop. They had lost people. They had lost homes, but they had found power. Power not in weapons or strength, but in the ability to fight in a way the enemy could not understand. Kara stood up slowly and pointed to the stars outside the window. She said nothing, but everyone followed her eyes. They all knew what was coming. The Zarnak mind reader returned to its ship and spoke with the general. Its voice was calm but cold. It reported that human resistance had become unpredictable, uncontrollable, and possibly unstoppable. It used a single word to describe the colony, now not broken, not defeated but evolving, and while the general planned his final assault, Kara began preparing for something else. She had intercepted a message from space, a signal from Earth. Reinforcements were coming. But they would take time. Until then, the colony would have to hold the line. She looked down at her wrench, now wrapped in wires and metal teeth, and whispered the words that had carried her this far. Anything can be a weapon. But she also knew now that the most powerful weapon of all was the one the Zarnak could never copy. The human mind. Earth fights back. The fourth night had passed with heavy silence, and the fifth morning began with a strange stillness over the colony. Not the quiet of safety, but the silence of two enemies waiting for each other to strike. Smoke still floated above the broken rooftops, and the air carried the bitter scent of scorched metal. Most of the humans were sleeping in shifts, moving between hiding places scattered through the ruins. They were tired, hungry, and bruised, but their eyes still burned with purpose. They had survived longer than anyone expected, and now they had something even more powerful than hope. They had contact from Earth. Kara had stayed up most of the night, decoding the weak signal coming from deep space. At first it had only been noise and static, but with some help from an old technician and a repurposed satellite dish built from a cooking pot and mirror shards, they had finally unlocked the message. Earth had heard their distress call. Reinforcements were on the way. A small fleet had launched 2 days ago, carrying supplies, weapons, and trained soldiers. The message warned that it would take time, but the most important part was this: Earth knew they were alive and Earth was coming. Colony had to survive until then. Kara stood before her group inside an abandoned daycare building where chalk drawings still covered the walls and broken toys lay scattered across the floor. Her team was smaller now, but stronger in spirit. They had learned to think differently, to fight like no army ever had. Kara showed them the signal from Earth, and for the first time in days there was laughter, not loud, not wild, but real. It was enough. That afternoon, Kara divided the group into small teams, and each one took responsibility for a different part of the defense. They did not have time to build walls, so they built distractions. They used old speakers to create fake radio signals and set up mirrors on rooftops to reflect sunlight into Zarnak sensors. The streets were covered with powder and slippery oil, making movement difficult. Children helped 2 rolling marbles across doorways, setting traps made from rubber bands and hooks. No one was useless. Every hand had a role. Every object had a purpose. In the colony's old concert hall, a group of musicians had returned, not with instruments, but with an idea. They used large speakers and old amps powered by car batteries to create sound barriers. When triggered, the system would release sharp, high-frequency tones designed to disrupt alien hearing. They tested it once, and it shattered every window in a block. Kara nodded in approval and gave the order to prepare it for battle by late evening. The Zarnak had started to move again. They had stopped relying on scans and now walked through the colony in armored groups, firing at anything that moved. But the humans did not meet them directly. They disappeared into walls, into tunnels, into shadows. At one intersection, a Zarnak tank turned its cannon toward a building, only to be blinded by a simple mirror reflecting the bright setting sun directly into its scanner. The tank turned wildly, lost control, and crashed into a water tower. The laughter that followed was brief, but honest. Kara watched the battle from a rooftop with binoculars made from melted lenses and wires. She saw how the Zarnak were changing tactics. They were becoming more aggressive, but also more afraid. They had stopped underestimating the humans, which made them more dangerous, but also more vulnerable. They now expected traps around every corner. And the best part was that half the time those traps were not even real. Kara had turned fear into a weapon, and now it was spreading faster than fire. In the southern edge of the colony, a young boy named Tom, who had never held a weapon, stood behind a wall with a slingshot and a bucket of marbles. When the Zarnak passed by, he rolled the marbles under their feet and watched as they slipped and scattered. He laughed and shouted insults and ran before they could react. It was not bravery in the way stories tell it, but it was real, and it mattered. Inside the Zarnak command ship, the general watched the situation spiral beyond his control. He had used force technology and trained soldiers, but still the humans pushed back with noise and mirrors and toys. He could not understand why they were not broken. He turned to the mind reader, but this time there were no answers. The alien only said that human resistance was no longer just physical. It was mental, it was cultural, it was something built into their way of thinking. That night the stars above the colony blinked with soft signals. The fleet from Earth was still far, but it was moving fast. Kara sat on the floor of the old daycare center, drawing plans in the dust with a broken piece of chalk. Around her, the others were building shields from table legs, wiring together homemade bombs, connecting traps with fishing line. They were not soldiers, and they never would be, but they had become something else, something stronger. Kara looked at the stars one last time before going underground. She no longer saw distant lights. She saw a promise, a fleet coming closer, a future still possible. She picked up her wrench and nodded to herself, not because the war was won, but because now she knew something the aliens never would. This was not just about weapons. This was about spirit, about inventions, about refusing to die quietly, and as long as they had that, the humans would never be defeated. The human strategy. The sixth day began with the air hanging thick and heavy, as if the ground itself was holding its breath. Smoke from old fires still drifted across the ruined colony, while strange bird-like creatures flew in circles above the wrecked towers. The humans had not stopped the Zarnak, but they had slowed them enough to make the aliens angry, and that anger was beginning to break their discipline. Patrols grew more violent, and random attacks came at all hours, yet the colony still stood not with walls, but with tricks, with noise, and with the unexpected. Now the survivors had one final chance to shift the battle. Kara knew that defending forever was not possible. Earth's fleet was still days away, and her people were tired and scattered. They needed one major strike, something so bold and so loud it would make the Zarnak pull back. The only way was to use the colony's greatest remaining asset, not as a weapon, but as a resource, the fusion power core buried deep below the energy station. If triggered correctly, it could release a shockwave powerful enough to destroy the Zarnak base camp and send a message across the stars. If triggered poorly, it could take half the colony with it. She gathered her team in the broken theater, where old seats had been turned into beds and wires ran across the ceiling like vines. They listened as Kara explained the plan. Many were afraid, but none said no. They had reached a point beyond fear. They were not thinking about survival now. They were thinking about meaning, about purpose, about leaving something behind that proved they had fought with everything they had. Even Mr. Leem, who was no longer with them, seemed to be present in spirit. His old toolkit sat on the table, and no one had moved it. Kara divided the group for the mission. One team would enter the underground tunnels and rewire the fusion core controls using spare parts and melted circuits. Another team would create a full-scale diversion above ground with noise machines, mirrors, smoke screens, and traps made to look like weapons. The third team would be Kara's own, leading the Zarnak straight into the trap. Every step had to be perfect. One mistake and the plan would fall apart. The colony felt different that day, not broken, but focused. Children carried wires while elders painted symbols on doors to mislead the enemy. The music system was activated again, filling the ruins with strange rhythmic beats made from drums and pipes. The Zarnak grew restless. Their scanners showed movement in every sector. Their soldiers could not trust their own vision. Some began firing at shadows. Others refused to enter certain streets. The fear had returned, but now it had shape. It had Rhythm. It had strategy. As Kara and her team approached the old energy station, she looked at the empty streets around her and felt the weight of everything they had done. Every trap, every distraction, every loss had led to this one moment. They slipped past alien patrols and entered the lower tunnels lit only by dim emergency lights. The air grew hotter the deeper they went, until they reached the fusion chamber, where the blue core pulsed slowly like a sleeping heart. Kara placed her hand on the control panel and closed her eyes, just for a second, remembering the quiet days before all this began. Up above, the final distraction was underway. Huge speakers blasted static-encoded signals into the sky while reflective blankets waved from rooftops, creating false readings for alien drones. Smoke grenades made from cooking powder and chemicals filled the air with thick white clouds. From inside the chaos came the sound of laughter and shouting. Fake voices played from old recorders. The Zarnak responded quickly, sending heavy units toward the center, but that was what the humans wanted. Every step the enemy took brought them closer to the Cork era, and her engineers worked in silence, reconnecting the power systems using homemade tools and damaged control boards. She gave the signal, and the outer defenses began to shut down, creating a false sense of weakness. The Zarnak believed the humans were finally breaking. They pushed forward, quickly chasing the noise and heat into the old station. Inside the command ship, the general watched the map and gave the order to crush the resistance in one final strike, but as the first group of Zarnak entered the core chamber, Kara was already gone. Her team had slipped through the back tunnels, leaving behind only wires and sensors. The core began to glow brighter as the trap activated. The doors slammed shut behind the aliens, sealing them inside. From a distant building, Kara watched through a broken monitor. She waited for the final reading to confirm the blast radius. When the countdown reached 0, the core released a pulse of energy, not large enough to destroy the colony, but strong enough to wipe out everything within the station and send a shockwave through the enemy's camp. The lights went out across half the alien base. Their communications crashed. Their machines froze. In a single moment, the humans had struck harder than ever before, not with guns, not with missiles, but with knowledge and timing and the courage to risk everything. The Zarnak began to fall back, pulling their troops from the colony's center. The general stood inside the dark command ship, staring at the failure before him. His enemy had no fleet, no army, no advanced technology, and yet they had just broken his entire ground force with trash and tricks. He looked to the mind reader for answers, but this time the alien said nothing. There was nothing left to explain. Kara stood beneath the stars with dust on her face and her wrench still in her hand. She looked out over the ruined colony and saw people standing again, not hiding. Children were climbing out of shelters. The elders were lighting small fires. Somewhere someone was playing music from a broken speaker. It was not a perfect victory, but it was a moment of light. The humans had done the impossible again. They had taken something that should have destroyed them and used it to strike back. Kara knew the war was not over. Earth's fleet had not arrived yet, and the Zarnak would regroup, but something had changed. The humans were not just surviving anymore. They were fighting like no species had ever fought, with mirrors, with wires, with sound, with silence, with tricks and courage, and the endless ability to turn anything into a weapon. Victory of the unexpected. The final day began without fire or fear. The sky above the colony was quiet for the first time in a week. No ships passed overhead. No drones scanned the ground. The Zarnak camp on the southern ridge had gone completely dark. Some believed it was a trap. Others thought the aliens had retreated to gather strength, but Kara did not believe either. She stood on the roof of the old command center, watching the horizon through a cracked scope, and she knew what silence like this meant. It was the sound of an enemy finally unsure of its own power. The shockwave from the fusion core had not only destroyed the Zarnak control systems, but it had shaken their confidence. They had marched onto Varian 3, expecting to conquer a quiet colony. with no military force, no space fleet, and no command structure. Instead, they had found humans using mirrors to blind their machines, spoons to jam their armor wires to reroute their weapons, and most dangerously, stories to turn fear into strength. They had tried to understand human tactics and failed because humans had not used tactics at all. They had used instinct and imagination and memory. That morning, Kara walked through the center of the colony, not as a soldier or a hero, but simply as one of them. Around her, people were rebuilding, not waiting. Children painted strange symbols on buildings to confuse enemy scanners. Workers reinforced their hiding tunnels with melted metal plates. Even the injured helped by designing new traps from crutches and leftover solar panels. No one waited for Earth anymore. Earth would come, but by the time it did, there might be nothing left to save, or everything might already be safe. Kara believed in the second option. Inside the Zarnak command ship, the general watched the flickering images on his screen. His soldiers were scattered and silent. His officers had stopped sending reports. The mind reader stood beside him, no longer trying to explain. It had seen into the human mind, and what it found was not one clear strategy, but millions of tiny thoughts, all working in different directions, creating chaos that could not be tracked. The general understood now that this war could not be won with control, because control was something the humans had learned to live without. In the late afternoon, the sky above the colony changed again, but not with the arrival of more warships. This time it was a signal from space, a clear, strong message bouncing across all open frequencies. Earth's fleet had entered orbit. They had picked up the last transmission sent by Kara's team, and now they were calling for status confirmation. Kara picked up the radio with steady hands and replied, not with a cry for help, but with a simple message: the colony stands. The enemy is in retreat. We are still fighting. But even as the Earth ships moved into position, something unexpected happened. Zarnak sent a message too. It was short and direct, not in human language, but translated through the system. The message said, "The colony has changed the rules. We will withdraw." There was no threat, no demand, no final act of violence. The Zarnak were leaving, not because they were beaten in combat, but because they had been defeated in the mind. They could not understand how they had lost so completely to weapons made from household parts and courage made from grief. As the alien ships lifted off one by one, leaving black trails in the sky, Kara watched without celebration. She did not cheer. She did not wave a flag. She simply stood with her people as they watched the enemy vanish into the distance. Some wept. Others remained silent. No one quite knew what to feel. They had survived. They had won. But they had paid a price that could never be measured in. The following days, Earth soldiers landed on Varian 3, bringing food supplies and medical help. They were prepared to find a destroyed settlement, but instead, they found something else. They found a working power grid powered by solar panels made from broken windows. They found defense systems built from kitchen fans and sound traps. They found a population organized through hand signals and chalk drawings. They found survivors who had not only outlived an invasion, but had rewritten the rules of warfare using tools no army had ever considered valuable. Kara stood with the Earth commander and showed him the colony's new map drawn by hand on a wall in the school. She explained the traps, the tunnels, the tricks, and the sacrifices. The commander asked what weapon had turned the tide, and she smiled for the first time in days and answered, "None. We used what we had. We made it work. We made them doubt." That was enough. The story of Varian 3 spread across systems faster than any battle in recent history. Military leaders studied it. Scientists reviewed it. Strategists failed to fully explain it. But across all human colonies, one truth echoed louder than any theory. Humans had proved once again that anything can be a weapon, and sometimes the greatest weapon of all is the refusal to follow the rules. In the colony, Kara returned to the bakery where it had all started. She placed her old wrench on a shelf beside Mr. Leem's empty toolbox and closed the door. She stepped outside into the morning light as the first real wind in days passed through the colony, clean and free and quiet, not with fear but with peace. And above her, the stars continued to shine, not as cold lights in the sky, but as reminders that even in the darkness, humanity will always find a way to fight back.